So hello everybody, and thank you for attending the Automating Process for Productivity webinar. We're glad you're here. My name is Samantha Ferry, and I'm the Client Services Director for Strategic Consulting. And just to give you a little bit of background, Strategic Consulting was founded in 2006 as a custom development consulting firm. Our services range from different services including business process management, advanced analytics and business intelligence, data warehousing, portals, mobile applications, and integration. We have deep expertise and specialize in automating business processes through the creation of intelligent workflows, which is why we're here today. So today we will be discussing how we helped one of our clients increase productivity dramatically through this workflow process. I'd like to introduce you to Justin Land, who's the Director at Strategis Consulting and will be presenting today. Justin, I'll turn the presentation over to you, and if you want to go ahead and allow for questions or whatever you'd like to do, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sam. So what we wanted to walk everyone through today was a little bit about one of our clients, as what they had experienced, what they had gone through. In this situation, the client was responsible for rolling out several new products, and so we helped them to automate a lot of the processes around new product development. We'll walk you through some of the things that they had tried, some of their improvements along the way, and some of the things that came sort of before us, leading into where we got involved and how we further helped them to improve based on the implementation of an automated workflow management solution. So our client, they are a small animal feed and supply manufacturer. So that means they actually create things like bird seed and animal bedding. So, hamsters, gerbils, guinea pigs, those types of things. So someone goes into, PetSmart, Pet Supplies Plus, any of those types of stores, and you'll see, hundreds of their products on the shelves. They actively carry around 250 SKUs, and those are changing on an annual basis. Somewhere to around 20 to 25% of their product line is turning over, and so all based on different market factors, where they are constantly having to innovate and having to evolve everything that they are doing to bring new product to market based on countless market changes. So in their process, as they try and organize and bring to market 50 to 75 new products per year, they're dealing with several challenges. Number one, they are a small manufacturer. So with that by nature, they have limited resources. The market is constantly changing for them. Retailers are changing who they are, what they're offering, the floor space that's available. This year they might have, extra shelving and want to be pushing, animal bedding. Next year they might be saying, square footage wise, things have shrunk. We need to now consolidate. Can you provide things in a smaller package or in a, smaller, shelf space? Some things that might sit on a shelf might be, on a rack the next year, and all sorts of different changes. So they're constantly having to evolve, constantly having to change their manufacturing processes and their marketing and their packaging and their product lines just to keep up and to keep their products in stores. So with that, they had developed their new product development process. They started out with sort of a traditional project management approach. We're going to build out our Gantt chart. We are going to start with all of the little detailed steps that we know of who has to be involved when we need something to be designed, when we need marketing to get involved, we need to notify and inform sales of what's going to be available, when we need to retool our manufacturing equipment, operations, logistics, transportation, any number of different moving parts. They had every task sort of built out into this, long Gantt chart project plan. Every task was accounted for. Every task was then assigned to a team and specifically down to an individual. So, Mary, who sits in marketing, was on there for the 5 tasks that she would need to be accounted for. All of the dependencies were then built in, and these became these monstrous project plans that were intended to show exactly where they are, exactly when they would hit each milestone, and then on a weekly basis, just like many other projects out there, they would meet to review, okay, right now we have 5 or 6 or 10 different products that are currently in the works. Let's walk through each project plan one by one, verifying status, planning for the following week, reviewing, anything that's gone on, addressing any issues. Sort of following a very traditional sort of waterfall approach, and it was leading to just this big minutia of details that people would have to sit through. And unfortunately, what they were finding was people would then sort of sleep through some of those meetings just because of the detail that they would go into. With that, they also had, several different, questions that would constantly arise. It was always, marketing trying to figure out, when would product packaging be available? When could they actually finalize their designs and actually create the marketing material to coincide with what was actually going, the product was actually going to look like? Operations was dealing with scheduling of the actual production lines and when would they need to retool equipment to make sure that things would be available and ready. Sales was constantly trying to talk to clients, but never knew exactly when product would be actually available and to be delivered. So with that, they were constantly, they would attend these meetings, they would walk through the details, but at the end of the day, no one really had clarity of the situation and the actual intended results. With that, several problems would come up. Production was ready, weeks before packaging would actually be available. Sales would overpromise on their delivery dates. You can have your new product's going to be available in a 25-pound bag in 3 weeks. Well, chances are, 3 months later, it still might not be out the door. New product inventory would build up as sales and marketing was trying to play catch up. So production was being retooled, manufacturing schedule would come out, they'd start developing product and storing it and bagging it and creating excess inventory only to, wait on, sales and marketing to actually get that to a client and into a store. So one of the first things that they did was they said, you know what, this approach isn't working. We need to look at lean manufacturing. So they brought in a new operations lead. Person had a strong background in lean manufacturing processes, and they came with their plan, do, check, act PDCA process. And they said, everything we're going to do, we're going to plan it, we're going to act upon it, we're going to check it and verify it and test it, and then we're going to respond to that, to our findings. And so it was intended to, how can we narrow this down and how can we address all the little details that were causing hiccups along the way. So they broke out their A3s. So those that aren't familiar with the A3, it's the idea that there's, you mapped the process and identified the problem statement and dug into the root cause, that you could create improvements along the way. And A3 sort of refers to the fact that these are typically done on an 11 by 13 sheet of paper. They are very detailed and, walk through all the necessary and appropriate steps to creating process improvement. So if we actually stop and think about it, and we actually look at the root causes, we identify the appropriate metrics, we should be able to create improvement. And it worked. Improvements were made. They were able to identify some efficiencies. They were able to eliminate some steps. They were able to rework some of their processes, and many of their analytics did improve. And their time to market on an average product was reduced. However, there was a looming problem. The employees then revolted. They had a huge increase in turnover. Employee satisfaction was starting to tank. People were not happy, and they were constantly feeling like they were just being overworked. The problem was that they'd go into a meeting, and the Gantt chart they were reviewing was never correct. It was constantly way out of whack. Someone would be missing something, they'd have to push out the schedule. Everything was constantly sliding to the right. It was a nightmare. People would get into a meeting and they would say, "Oh yeah, that's done." They'd be asked about the next task and they'd be, "Oh yeah, that's done too." Reality was they'd be getting to about 90% completion. They'd want to save face in front of all of their peers and their bosses, and they were getting things checked off the list. Bottlenecks that were being identified were constantly in the decision-making phase. So it was always, things were running a little bit smoother on a day-to-day task. Things were getting, corrected down at the operations level of the organization. However, anything that went for review or anything that went to executives was constantly waiting. Decisions were becoming the bottleneck. In some of that decision making, when they would finally get someone nailed down and finally get something finalized and approved, the documentation was never there to back it up. It was being handled in emails. It was handled in one-off meetings, discussions, on-the-fly conversations, but it was never being documented and never referenceable after the fact. And at the end of the day, employees were feeling overworked. There was no visibility into what their actual workload was. Staffing could never be adjusted. Resources could rarely be justified. Some departments had, excess employee levels, and others were constantly short. And they could never get a true picture of the real ebbs and flows of the work level. So with all of their improvements, they were still struggling. The process was becoming a little bit more efficient. However, it was not to the benefit of the organization. And that's where we got engaged. So one of the first things that we said to them was that this is not going to happen, in a day. This is not going to be a one and done. Very similar to the same best practices of lean manufacturing. We need to follow iterations. We need to, not look for perfection. We need to take this one step at a time. And we will continue to evolve the process and evolve the solution to further tweak and fine tune what will be the eventual outcome, and how to get them more efficient, improve employee morale, level out their production lines, and ensure better margins in their organization. So, we brought that fresh set of eyes. We looked at the process. We reviewed what they had identified as their single set of sequential steps, and we realized that that was just not going to work. You couldn't identify 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to N steps to the process. It just doesn't work that way. So we also clarified for them that one of the biggest problems that we're seeing is sort of that vision. That transparency is not there. When employees are saying that they're overworked and their managers can't accurately reflect on what the tasks are that are on their plate, and they cannot help to sort out priorities, they have a visibility problem. Transparency was not there from product line to product line, where manufacturing could say, okay, what are the 5 products coming out this next batch, these next 2 weeks, and how can we plan accordingly? It was all managed as 5 separate processes. Escalations around bottlenecks were not happening, right? So things would wait for weeks on end because someone wouldn't show up to a meeting. Someone would be out of the office. A vacation would get in the way. Or things would get buried as, what was marked complete. So we sort of moved on. The problem was that, there wasn't the right set of eyes or the right visibility and transparency to the process to ensure that things would actually flow smoothly. So one of the first things that we had to do was remap the process, and we had to break it apart down into what we considered workflows, smaller subsets of tasks that could be handled with their necessary dependencies, but also interdependencies between workflows to make sure that a single set of tasks could be accomplished and could account for any touch points that are necessary. Process needs to be flexible to accommodate any sort of resource limitations. So when they were assigned to a department, and the department might be a department of 1 in this case, they were, they had to be able to accommodate for, any sort of scheduling limitations. When, Mary from marketing is out on maternity leave, they needed to have a backup plan, and they needed to account for that, and they needed to plan accordingly. In their old system, when they were waiting on, the pile of Gantt charts, tasks would just wait. In the new system, they could get that reassigned. It was a lot more transparency to really where things were happening and how things were getting assigned. In addition to that, the communication needed to be centralized. Communication needed to be captured, and it needed to be made available to anyone involved in the process. So our recommendation was an automated workflow management solution. Let's get rid of the Gantt chart. Let's replace the piece that gives us that warm and fuzzy that is rarely accurate. Let's make sure we are able to capture the necessary details. Let's make sure that we can capture the documentation along the way. Make sure we can coordinate the schedules across all of the different departments and all of the different dependencies and all of the different products that are coming down the pipeline. And then let's make sure that we can also escalate when appropriate. So as things fall behind or as thresholds are exceeded, the necessary triggers would happen. So there was this constant reinforcement of the process because it was no longer manual. People weren't responsible for just sending an email to the next person in line and then waiting for the weekly status meeting to be able to raise their hand and go, yep, I sent my email over to Joe in production. He should be good to go. He's got everything he needs. Well, now it was reinforced. Was the documentation that Joe was actually waiting on uploaded? Was it attached? Was it complete? Was it thorough? Were there any questions? All of that stuff could then be captured and built into the solution, whereby you couldn't just go to a meeting and get a pass for saying the right thing at the right time. So everything was broken down into core elements. Workflows broken down into tasks. Tasks all had statuses. They're all assigned to groups or individuals and would sit in queues waiting for the next step of the process, and could all then be visible and measured and reported on and analyzed for the real true bottlenecks and the real true status and the real true workloads of everyone involved. So executives could see if they were truly the problem. They could also ask better questions. They any of the false promises around 90% completion being good enough could then be eliminated. Everything was then reinforced, and the process was better adhered to. And at the end of the day, a lot of the improvements all came back to communication. So the documentation along each task that made up the end-to-end workflow was then captured, and it was made available, and it was searchable, and it could be referenced. Key decisions were then made transparent to everyone involved. You would know who was the decision maker, when that decision was made, and what information did they have available to make that decision. Reminders and alerts and notifications were happening on a proactive basis. They were able to better manage their process because it didn't rely on a project manager. It was inherent in their process, in their workflow, and it just happened. It became the core of their organization. Analytics were built into the solution. Automatically, as tasks were happening and as statuses were changing, timestamps were being recorded, details were being measured. Every step along the way could then be referenced back to who did it, when did it happen, what's it waiting on, what's the next step. And it could all be recorded, it could be measured, it could be analyzed, and it could provide better transparency to everyone involved to further improve and fine-tune and make more efficient as they evolved. So while there was an initial sort of near instantaneous improvement in just clarifying sort of the communication of the process, they were able to reduce time to market. And that was just by nature of getting rid of some of the unnecessary dependencies as people were waiting on, oh, I never got that email, or I didn't see that email, or no one ever told me to move forward. So they got rid of a lot of that. Employees were quickly turning around and becoming more satisfied because their bosses had the visibility and they had the justification to say, hey, I got too much on my plate, or hey, I'm waiting on this. When's it going to happen? The Gantt chart went by the wayside. People didn't have to dig through papers and piles just trying to find the details of what comes next and who else needs to be involved. And project management really evolved into true product management, where they could better address what sales was hearing in the marketplace and understand what was being done in innovation and product packaging, and just able to respond to the marketplace with more innovative products and better proactive management of their processes. And naturally, sort of some of the problems resolve themselves. So whereas before production was ready weeks before packaging being even available, they were able to resolve that because there was proactive notification of any delays in the workflow. When sales was overpromising delivery dates, they now had full process transparency to make sure that everyone involved could see a real-time status. Product inventories were no longer becoming excessive because there was now integrated scheduling across all product lines. So production was happier, sales was happier, marketing was happier, everyone involved in operations was happier. And looking at this from the total end-to-end solution, really this was a great example where the technology was configured around the process rather than the process being mapped to the technology. There was clarity of roles, tasks, and assignments. There was sort of this integrated visibility across all product lines. All of the communication along the way was then captured and recorded. Notifications and dependencies were made seamless. And when something was sitting at a bottleneck or not being addressed, there was proactive escalation. It was automated. It just happened. The reminder email went out. No one had to sit there and monitor and wait for the Gantt chart to turn red or the stoplight to turn red or any other number of manual steps to occur or oversight committees to eventually respond. And with that all comes back to the fact that they had integrated analytics. So every step of the way could then be measured, it could then be analyzed, it could then be established with benchmarks, and could then be escalated when and if needed. And I know we are hopefully ahead of schedule quite a bit. Certainly appreciate everyone's time today. If you have any questions, that's my contact information and Sam's contact information. We are happy to answer any questions after the fact, provide these slides to anyone that wants them or wants to share them. And I want to thank everyone for their time.